Well, if you are a remodeling contractor, really any type of contractor, you got to listen to this interview. We're talking to Doug Howard, who is with Remodelers Advantage. And this is a company that provides consulting for remodeling contractors. And he gives away so much good advice in here for free that whether you sign up for their service or not, you got to listen to this. It's just, I had light bulbs going off, and I'm not even a remodeling contractor. A lot of just quality business, uh, classic, tried and true ideas that somehow, at least myself, I overlook or have never, I don't think about on my own. And so, great discussion with Doug. Can't thank him enough for coming on. He has got a mile-long list of experience and resume and qualifications, and he describes them a little bit at the beginning. But he really knows his stuff, and he's just a great guy, and I could not be more pleased to bring you this discussion. So without any further ado, Doug Howard from Remodelers Advantage. I guess maybe the first place to start is if you just kind of give us a background, not just about Remodelers Advantage, but just in your career in terms of consulting and such, and we'll get into the specifics after that. But I'd love to kind of hear about your career and then a little bit about what Remodelers Advantage does, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, sure. So, I went to business school, undergraduate business school, graduated and went into kind of corporate life and lasted very short period of time there. I didn't like that at all. So I went to work for a small business accounting and consulting company that was based in Atlanta but had 12 offices around the country. And they focused mainly on the petroleum industry, gas stations, convenience stores, training for the oil companies, and that kind of thing. And I was willing to move around when they had openings, and I kind of felt like I was in a U-Haul most of my first few years, and but ended up becoming president of that company after 7 years, and then bought the company the year afterwards.
Oh my
And
gosh.
then, and then continued to own and operate it for. I say I bought it. We bought 4 of the 12 offices. We bought the what were the more profitable offices, and then I ran that for 17 years.
Wow.
It moved more from consulting to accounting, and that really wasn't my first love. I had a marketing degree. I love business, but accounting was kind of a byproduct. But it became very much, tax software and data security and tax seasons. And so, as I was growing the Maryland office where I was based, I started to slowly sell off the others. Started a consulting company in 2008, right around the time of the recession, just trying to help people kind of get back on track or, that kind of thing. And it was a little bit of a sideline. But when I finally sold off the accounting practice, I made that my main activity, which was really what I wanted to do anyhow. And in the process, I came across Remodelers Advantage. So I had originally worked across pretty much every industry, did a lot of work with startups, helped about 400 businesses get started in Maryland.
Wow.
And then, but when I came across Remodelers Advantage, they were looking for someone to kind of develop their consulting capability. They had some mentoring that they did and some accounting consulting, but really wanted to grow that. So they actually hired me to do their strategic plan in 2017.
Oh.
And they kind of like to describe it that I came and did their strategic plan and then just refused to leave.
They'd never let you go.
Yeah. So I started doing some consulting work for some of their members that were in their roundtables program. So Remodelers Advantage historically had been a peer group company. So they brought together home remodeling companies, interior home remodeling companies, put them in groups of 10. They were from different parts of the country. So they weren't competing, and they would share financials and best practices and that kind of thing. So I started working with a couple of their members, some that were having some real challenges, either with growth or cash flow, and that seemed to work really well. And then I came on board full time in November 2017, and so just celebrated my 4th anniversary with them, and we've grown it to be substantially bigger than it was, which is great because we get to work with a lot more remodeling companies, and at the same time, I also facilitate some of the peer groups as well. So I kind of get to work on both sides of the house.
Oh, that's interesting. I've always kind of felt like, and maybe you can tell me, maybe every industry feels this way, like general business and general industry, that would be nice. But here in the construction industry, things are a little too whatever, harebrained or a little too uncertain for general, I'll say like some kind of classic textbook business consulting to really work. Now, obviously that's not true because this is what you guys do, but do
Yeah.
you see that? Do you see contractors with that kind of mindset, or maybe that's just they just need so much help to
Oh,
even get
sure.
to the point to like think of
Yeah.
it that way, or is there something about construction that is kind of a different animal from I don't know, like software or something a little more typical?
No, I think it's a great question. I think there's a couple of things. It's a little bit of a blend. I think there are definitely some things unique to construction in terms of the pace of projects. I think when you get to something like remodeling, when your car mechanic works on your car, he doesn't do it right in front of you, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and when the doctor operates on you, at least they knock you out first, so you can't see what they're
Yeah.
doing, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times, construction projects, you're doing it right in front of the customer in their
Yeah.
home. So that I think is one challenge. The size and scope of projects, I think, is also, for what is in many ways a small business. There are very few other small businesses that have like, in some cases, 20 transactions a year, but they're very,
Yeah.
very large transactions.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things when I first joined the company, working with a lot of folks with cash flow issues. So I was sort of applying traditional cash flow models,
Mm.
which usually have more to do with things like collecting your money and how you structure your contracts. And really, what we realized was, if it takes 12 or 18 weeks to get a project into production, you've got to have that window of cash flow because you can't go sell something tomorrow and really positively impact your cash situation. So
Yeah.
it does definitely require a different way of thinking. And then there's also a lot of things that are much more applicable than people think. A lot of times when I talk to folks, they say, "Well, Doug, because I do a lot of work with process improvement, like lean and eliminating
Hmm.
waste and those kinds of things," and they'll say, "Well, that doesn't work for us because every process is different. I mean, every project is a unique one. We're
Hmm.
custom, that kind of thing." And I said, well, you go into a Subway sandwich shop, they make 1,000 different iterations of a sandwich every single day and get everyone right. You can have
Yeah.
a standard process applied to a very customized product. And
Yeah.
when we start to realize that that's the case, and we put those standard processes in place and say, okay, well, whether it's this kind of flooring or this kind of layout or whatever it is, that's unique. But that doesn't mean your process has to be chaos. So I feel like I met the industry halfway,
Yeah. Yeah.
to but so that's kind of I think what I
Well,
experienced the
and
most.
that's kind of, I guess, what you're doing is helping because, like, let's say a small contractor, they're asking themselves that question while they're maybe reading a book or listening to a podcast about business, thinking, okay, that would be nice. I guess in a lot of ways, what you're doing is helping that person find ways that it is applicable.
Right?
Um, so,
Yeah.
in terms of small business, I've always been a little bit not confused, but I felt like it's such a vague term and such a not helpful term
Yes.
because the way I understand it is basically anything that's not publicly traded counts as small business. Well, that could mean 50 employees, which is from where I'm sitting, that is not a small business. That's 50
Yeah.
employees or 100 or 500. That's a big business. And so sometimes it feels like you almost got to like define these things a little closer. So
Right.
what size of small business and small remodeling contractors are you guys helping? Because I know there are some who are, and maybe we talk about this here in a minute, but where the entire business is kind of built around one key person who,
Sure.
and that works for a lot of folks. But what do you find? What is a small business or what size businesses need help in this kind of way?
Sure. Yeah. So our threshold for our roundtable program is 1 million in revenue, and generally companies that have employees.
Yeah.
So because at that level, there's enough complexity that some of the things that we teach and some of the processes that we
Hmm.
implement, they can make a difference. When I first came to the company, consulting was sort of given the task of anybody that didn't qualify. So if someone reached out to us and they weren't at 1 million in revenue, I would work with them sometimes to get them to that threshold, sometimes
Hmm.
to just help them through their processes. So there's definitely levels. So I think that that 500,000 to million single operator maybe has a helper and maybe has some outside admin is
Yeah.
kind of one level. I think there's lots and lots of folks at that level, and they, some of them are very successful, but they're not really building an organization.
Yeah.
The challenge is taking that next step is
Yeah.
actually, in some ways, it's a step in the right direction if you want to grow a company, but sometimes it's a step in the wrong direction financially, right?
Yeah.
I've had people say, well, if I took that next step, it would eat up all of what I make,
Right.
At about 1.5 million to 2 million, you start to see sort of that smaller remodeling company.
Hmm.
And in that $2 to $5 million range, there's some really, really great. That's kind of I would say, our bread and butter.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's another level of complexity at about 8 to 10 million. And again, some of this is regionally driven, so the numbers
Right.
may vary. And that's really where you have a level of management between the owner and the field work.
Yeah.
And so, it's one
Got it.
thing to manage people for the first time. It's
Right.
another thing to manage managers for the first time, right? Or
Yeah.
have managers be managers for the first time. And
Yeah.
then we have some companies that are, 20, $25 million, and it's just a completely different operation. But I think, to me, I would say our mainstream is that 2 to 5 million, and then
Yeah.
our larger version of small business, because I agree with you, the term's really weird, is maybe in that 8 to 10 million.
So maybe we'll go through a couple of those classes, but I know a lot of our listeners are what they might even be actually in the trades themselves and just kind of
Sure.
planning their career out and watching what their boss does, thinking, okay, I can do what he does. That's on my that's coming up for me. So when you have people at those early steps who are not quite maybe ready to work with you, what's some of the low hanging fruit or some of the easy like first steps you help someone who maybe is a key man doing most things themselves say like,
Yeah.
okay, take care of these things, let's talk in a year. What's some of the like the basics for those types of guys?
Sure. I think the three things that I most focus on right off the bat with folks is, first of all, we've got to start putting some processes in place, even if they're things that you're the only one that does them. If we ever want to grow beyond that, you know, start with checklists,
Mm.
document what you do. Those kinds of things are really, really helpful to start building that framework.
Mm.
Um, the second is just understanding where in the marketplace you want to be, more from a marketing standpoint. Like, what kinds of projects do you want? What makes you unique? Why are you good at what you do? Because that reputation starts to build very early on. And folks that, kind of get a little bit of a sense of, hey, this is a really good project for me, and I can explain to a customer why, they get
Mm.
a lot more traction a lot more quickly. And then the last thing I always tell folks is, the first two people we need to bring into the fold, whether they're employees or people you contract with, is somebody else that's really good on the production side, that understands construction, and someone that's really good on the admin side, that's going to take scheduling and things like that off your table or off the table for you. Maybe can do a little bit of bookkeeping, but it's like, when they can get from, sort of that doing everything themselves
Yeah.
to, I've got a go to in the field and I've got a go to in the office, and I can think of what my market is, and I can start to think about processes. That's like the bare structure to say, okay, well, now we
Huh.
can talk about what the next level would be.
Oh wow, yeah, that's really interesting. And you could see if a person had those two in place, all of a sudden that would make a little room where they could start tackling some bigger problems. A lot of the small contractors I know, they're almost so busy. They get almost so much work that their life is just frantic from one job to the next. Weekends cannot make a minute. Even to hiring somebody takes a little bit of time, and in some ways, it's there's almost I've felt this in my own business, like not time to take to hire someone. So what is it? Just kind of taking a step back and or maybe just raise your prices to push
Yes.
people away a little bit, or how do you even make time to like make a process, description and all that.
Yeah, it's tough. It really is, especially right now, because, a lot of folks are really, really busy. Even
Yeah,
larger companies are feeling that. There's just a tremendous amount of activity out there. I think one is, the more you can define what is a good project for you, the easier it is to say, I'm going to pass on this one.
yeah,
Sometimes there's that element of, I'll just take anything, and folks get themselves into difficulty where, you know,
hmm,
they're either on a continual learning curve, or they're taking on projects that are a little bit beyond what they can really comfortably handle, maybe at the time. But the other thing, honestly, Nate, is I spend a lot of time with folks saying, okay, if we're going to do something together or you really want help, you've got to give me 2 hours a week that you can isolate to
Mm-hmm.
really just be able to think about stuff and work on stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And for some folks, it's 5:30 to 7:30 on a Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
For others, it's a couple hours on a Saturday afternoon. But they've got to be able to isolate a little bit of time to be able to really think through some things. And it's amazing when they start to make that commitment. It's easy to start to see, well, just having taken that one or two or three steps, right? It
Yeah.
starts to it starts to bring some results in other ways. I think
Yeah.
a lot of times people get frustrated, like, people say, well, if the world would just stop, I could redo my business, right?
Yeah.
And actually, 18 months ago, or the world did stop, right?
Yeah.
And we really didn't stop and all work on our businesses. We actually wondered if we were going to have any business at all. So
Yeah.
it's like, well, when you got what you wished for, even that didn't pan out. So
Yeah.
I think it's just got to be steady, incremental. These are the big things I'm trying to tackle, but I'm going to make some time to really do that. And I think that, even when I get to work with folks, I feel like sometimes that's the only hour of the week that maybe they're getting able to step back, maybe feel a little bit like the business owner.
Yeah.
And I think but that's important. It's an important mindset to be in.
Yeah. Are you working exclusively with remodeling contractors? Because a general contractor, at least a lot of the ones I know, will do a lot of remodeling, but they'll also add a deck or, do a
Sure.
new driveway or that kind of thing. So are you guys kind of focused on remodeling exclusively, or is it kind of just general contracting and not so much the subcontractors per se, or how does that
Yeah,
work?
no, it's a great question. Yeah, so we really have two sides to the house, right? So the roundtable side is exclusively for interior home remodeling companies.
Huh.
Um, so really not even specialty remodelers like windows, siding, and doors. They're
Yeah.
not really part of that. So it's more kitchens, bath, whole home additions, new
Wow.
custom homes, that kind of thing. On the consulting side, though, it's really not that restricted. So
Huh.
the majority of folks I work with fall into that category just because I'm working with members, many members that are in our roundtable program. But about half of our consulting clients are not in our roundtables program at all.
Huh.
So I work with some specialty contractors. I work with a big wood flooring company in Chicago. I even work with a company that manufactures and distributes adhesives for wood flooring.
Oh,
Because sometimes a referral will lead you kind of a little bit further down the path.
right.
Um, but they're a big operation, but they sell the adhesives to
Huh.
the flooring and then the finishes. So it really gives us the ability to do things beyond just the home remodeling.
Yeah. What is the round table? We've said that a few times. I should have asked you to get more specific, but sounds like a conference call or a bunch of like-minded folks. But can you describe what that program is?
I can because I just got back from one. So the roundtables, we have about 25 peer groups. They're generally groups of about 10 companies and they're from different geographies. So a given group might have someone from Chicago, Seattle, Boston, what have you. They get together twice a year for a 3-day meeting. They put
Oh.
together a financial package, organizational chart. We have kind of a standard structure for how they report things.
Oh.
Um, and then when they get together, they meet at one of their companies. So someone will be the host. So it
Oh.
rotates within the group. So uh, last one I just did, the host was in Michigan. So everybody from the group goes to Michigan. That same group will be in Utah next year.
Wow.
Um, and then what they do is, and it's facilitated, and that's one of the things that I do. The first day is a case study on the host. So we
Hmm.
meet their employees, we visit their location, look at some of their jobs, come back and do kind of a SWOT analysis on steroids, if you will.
Hmm.
And then the second 2 days are basically about an hour focused on each company, reviewing their package, best practices. And the key to it is that each company makes commitments for things that they want to accomplish before the next meeting. Um, and then we put them into what we call micro boards, which is really 3 or 4 people from the group that they have a conference call every month in between the physical meetings to hold them accountable. How are you doing on your commitment? You said you were going to hire a project manager. How's that going? What are you stuck on? They do a lot of sharing. It's not unusual for someone to say, "Hey, does anybody have a good job description for such and such?" Or does anybody have a template
Mm.
for how to do change orders? Um, and my boss likes to joke and say that R&D stands for rip off and duplicate.
Yeah.
Uh, so so that's really the essence of it. And what we find is, like some groups when they're first getting started, they're still getting to know each other. But once a group's been together for 3 or 4 years, they serve as each other's board of directors. And the
Yeah.
cool thing about that is, when someone says, "Well, I'm going to do such and such," it is not unusual to have someone call them out and say, "You've been saying that for 2 years, and
Yeah.
you're not serious about it, and let's make a real commitment out of that."
Wow.
And stuff that really, I wish when I had my own business,
Yeah.
I had a peer group like that. I didn't get a lot of outside advice, and certainly not
Yeah.
from people that knew what my financial situation was, or my employee situation was, or even in some cases what my personal situation was. So it's very, very powerful. It's a great
Yeah.
process. It's a great program.
Are the guys generally like I'm trying to imagine whether I would get more out of showing my shop and like workplace and getting feedback or seeing somebody else's. Like there's probably light bulbs going off on both
Yeah,
sides. Do you ever have somebody show up at a shop and just instantly be like, I'm doing that, even if it's like
yeah,
whatever tool storage or something?
yeah, yeah. Every time, it's so funny because we're there to help that company get to the next level, and
Yeah.
people were as we're doing the tour, they're like, "Okay, I want to set my warehouse up like that. I
Yeah.
want. Oh, look at that chart. I don't track that kind of stuff."
Yeah.
And then one of the cool things is we interview their key employees. We set up in teams,
Huh.
and just at the operating level, hearing what some folks are doing in terms of how they handle certain situations, and like right now the disruption of material flow and some of
Yeah.
those things, it's like real time research to say, well, okay, well, how are you handling it? Like, what's going on in your world? um,
Yeah.
and even when they do the analysis of reviewing each other's financials, there's something about reviewing somebody else's financials. They call it looking in the mirror. They're
Yeah.
we're looking at the computer and analyzing these things, but then we're also looking in the mirror saying, "Well, I don't do that very well either," you
Yeah.
know, which is powerful. It's great.
How so you said you'll have guys in this roundtable for several years. They'll kind of just stay in it as a regular ongoing sort of, I don't
Yeah.
know, business improvement thing without there's in other words, there's not like a graduation date to the program. People stay as long as they're kind of getting something out of it. Is that how it works?
Yeah. I mean, on average, we really start to see the biggest impact when they've been with us about 4 to 5 years. And in
Wow.
that 5 to 8 year window, they really, really do some amazing things. We have some that have been with us much longer. They kind of go into what we call our mentor program.
Oh,
So it's a little less structured, and they like to go to really cool places.
yeah.
So, um, but then they also do some mentoring and facilitating for our other groups, which is
Oh,
really kind of a way to give back. Um, and I know you mean it in the general sense, but you'd be surprised how many women business owners that we have that are roundtables members as well.
wow.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah,
so it's
I'm sure I would because like in my world and the people I know, it's so small. I know, like I keep saying like the people I know, but I'm talking about like 8 contractors. That's it,
yeah, yeah,
And you
yeah,
think about the country and the world. Obviously, there's
yeah,
zillions, and so the likelihood of there's probably all types, and undoubtedly
yeah,
there's some amazing women, especially in the remodeling space. They probably have some pretty I don't know, good
yeah.
skills, honestly, in terms of working with customers, in terms of all of it, I'd imagine.
Yeah, they definitely bring a different perspective, and it's fun to see some of the companies that are developing in that regard.
Hmm.
We have a lot of companies that husband and wife,
Yeah.
that are really both very active in the business. And one of the cool things we get to work on, and I get to work on this a lot on the consulting side, is when businesses transition from one generation to the next.
Oh, wow.
So, and it's funny, we're seeing more and more that are transitioning not from dad to son, but from dad to daughter, which is a
Yeah.
whole different dynamic.
Wow. How often do people kind of get in the program with an exit in mind? Like maybe they're going to sell the business and they're like, I got to clean this up before I can even have a saleable asset.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's about even thirds in terms of someone comes in because they've got major problems to address,
Uh-huh.
others that just want to grow and they really want that path for growth, and the
Yeah.
others are that third scenario you just described. Hey, I've got to transition out of this thing in 3 to 5 years, and it's got to be something
Yeah.
that's sellable. And we
Yeah.
actually have a whole program. It's called Value Builder. It was developed by the gentleman that wrote John Warlow, that wrote the book Build to Sell.
Huh.
That we got certified in and we use in our practices, which is designed to create a framework for creating a more sellable business 3, 4, 5 years from now
Huh.
by really doing the things that today that need to be done to make the company less dependent on the owner, more dependent on processes, those kinds of
Wow.
things.
So
Yeah,
aside from having like let's say clean books and, all the correct insurances and that kind of stuff in terms of getting a business ready to sell, how does it generally work when it's actually time to sell? Do they list with a broker, or at that point they got enough word of mouth that like one of the employees steps up? But how
yeah,
do these kinds of mid-size construction companies go through a sale process? Like for example, if I was going to buy one, which sometimes I've thought about, maybe in my
sure.
next phase of my career, I kind of wouldn't even know where to start. I wouldn't look on Craigslist. That would be the junk. I would think.
Yeah, right, right, yeah.
Where does the good stuff
Yeah.
sell, and how do you find it, or where do you list it?
So there's four scenarios, and the fourth is the worst. So I'll start with the best. One is, you've got a family member that wants to take on the business, and it's more of planning a good transition.
Uh huh.
The second is you've got someone on your leadership team, maybe a general manager or production manager that wants to ascend to take over the business. Um, and sometimes when we don't have that person right now, we'll even recruit for that position, knowing what we're really looking for is a potential successor.
Wow.
Um, the third is literally taking it out to the open market, but I totally agree with you. When we work through that process with folks, we want to build a package, we want to build a narrative, but we also want
Hmm.
to have them work with a broker. We want folks that, when they're looking at the business, are looking for a professionally run business.
Yeah.
And the fourth one, which I sad to say, I think is probably 75% of who we talk to, they do their last job and they close up shop and walk away. And there's no residual
Wow.
value for these businesses. And when
Wow.
I get in, that was one of the real shockers when I get in the industry. Selling a service business is always a challenge if it's closely tied to the business owner.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of people's transition plan when I started working was, you know, I invest my money, I have a retirement plan, but when I'm done, I'm done.
Right.
And it's we're starting to move the needle
Yeah.
on that, but it's really getting folks to realize that no, if you've got a cash flow and a reputation and a process and
Huh.
subcontractors, you can have a sellable business.
How do you got any stories of someone? I could imagine, let's say for the family selling it, that it would be bittersweet. But also when it goes to the right person and there's a really successful handoff, it's got to just be the best feeling ever for that person
Sure,
to see their life's work kind of
continue.
roll forward. Do you ever have people just like, yeah, I don't know, just having just tears of joy, when
Yeah.
something like that comes through?
Absolutely. Well, and it's funny because one of the big questions is, should I put my name on my company? Does that inhibit someone
Yeah.
buying it later on? And I always remind people, Sears and H&R Block, and those were actually people. Business names that we know, those were people, right? So,
Good point.
um, so I don't think it's an inhibitor, but it is. It can be very, very rewarding, and it's really kind of nice when a transition happens when you know the creator, the founder, is still able to, maybe visit the business, maybe
Yeah.
mentor the new owner, kind of enjoy the fruits of that. So that's really a cool thing.
Man, I've got this story, and I'm just going to tease it for the audience a little bit, but it speaks to this. And I'm hoping to make a video about this, but it's this exact story: a fellow who sells his business to a nephew, but wasn't able to stop working. Just like basically kept
Right.
coming, which is probably pretty normal. And
Yeah.
it's really kind of a moving story the way this like went out over a few 6 months, and there was a very definite like in a positive, semi-positive way, like, well, guess he's not coming to the job site anymore, and it's just like a almost like it could be a movie kind of a story.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
I'm sure that
Yeah.
happens where you wake up like my dad, who's the face of our business, and he's been a contractor for 40 years. He
Mhm.
leaves the house, he gets breakfast at the same place every morning, he goes
Yeah.
to the lumber yard every morning, and even on the days when there's nothing to pick up, he still does that. He's still like, it's like
Yeah.
a habit, like muscle memory, just to like
Sure.
clear his head, So it probably takes a while for
Yeah.
some folks. I'm sure there's some who go straight to golf or fishing, but I'm sure there's a
Yeah.
lot who just can't stop.
No, that's exactly right. And I think the biggest challenge in that is always making sure that you want the company to be as strong as it can be, but you also want to really assess the strengths and weaknesses of the next generation. One of the
Yeah.
things that's really hard is when someone's developed that business over 25, 30, 40 years, they've developed a lot of contacts, they've developed a lot of financial resource. Um, and even when
Mm,
things aren't documented, they know the way things ought to be. And
mm,
sometimes that doesn't just necessarily transcend to the next generation.
mm.
And the real challenge when you do that is, if if I'm the father and you're the son, and part of my retirement is you're going to pay me something for the business, well, now we're both dependent on this thing being successful.
Right.
So the son doesn't want to, or daughter doesn't want to let dad, mom down, which adds a level of pressure. But
Yeah.
sometimes, and so one of the things that we end up spending a lot of time working with folks on is what is the true condition of the business and how can we make it stronger, but also what is the true condition of that next generation of folks coming in and how ready are they for this? Have
Yeah.
they had any management training at all? Do they have good credit? Do they have, what are the things that you want to do to make it much more likely, because they don't have that 30 or 40 years of experience,
Yep,
you know?
yep, for sure. And they may not necessarily be ready for that moment when, I don't know, things go wrong, but they would need a contact or a skill or some experience that is non-existent. You
Right.
might have forgotten about.
Yeah. And then the other side of it is that sometimes when the next generation takes over, they have such a reverence for what's been done
Yeah,
that they're a little hesitant to actually take the wheel.
yeah,
And I always tell folks when we're going through that process, it's kind of like teaching your kids to drive.
yeah,
Like, you're in the passenger seat and you can kind of reach over and grab the wheel if you have to, but eventually
yeah,
you have to let them take the wheel and you have
yeah.
to let them drive.
Yeah.
So it's a challenging thing, but it's a tremendously rewarding thing and such a great way to build wealth, into a family over multiple years and multiple generations too.
Oh yeah, especially when there's, like you said, there's family and there's real estate assets and these
Yeah.
just multi-generational, I don't know, institutions in a community with like the skills, that kids have been involved with forever. I could see it being a
Yeah.
pretty serious and just great when that handoff happens. So maybe talking a little bit about the next size of business. This, I'm still thinking about these kind of smaller side,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
on the businesses that get a little larger, let's say, what are 50 to 100 employees, I'm thinking specifically, I'd love to hear you talk about lean. And I know the basics. When I was in school, I took a Six Sigma class, and
Yep.
that was a while ago, so it's a little fuzzy. But I don't know if very many people are fully up to speed with the concept. So could you give us kind of the crash course of lean and how it applies to our industry?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So Lean was born out of the Toyota production system. So Toyota really mastered that. A comparable program is Six Sigma that came out of Motorola. So they were kind of side by side.
Oh, I always thought it was the same thing. I guess not,
Yeah.
huh?
No, it's actually two very different ways of looking at kind of the
Okay.
same problem.
Yeah.
So Six Sigma, what it does is it sort of creates a statistical analysis for everything that goes on and says we're going to be really, really good performers to like the sixth decimal place, kind of like it's a mathematical sort of thing. The
Yeah.
reason I like lean is it's a little more organic than that.
Yeah.
So lean says if there's 10 steps in a process, probably only 8 of those are really steps that the customer cares about that add value to the process. And so we're going to find ways to eliminate the other two, not to work faster, not to cut corners. So one example I always give is like a hospital emergency room, right? You go to a hospital emergency room with whatever ailment you have, and your average stay is about 4.5 to 5 hours. But your actual value added time, the time you're seeing a doctor, getting a prescription, or having a test run, is about 35 or 40 minutes
Yeah.
of that 4.5 hours,
Yeah.
right? All that extra time, the waiting, the filling out paperwork, all that stuff is not a value added to the customer. So the lean process says we lay out all the steps, we look for those things that are not value added, and then you look for things that you can eliminate. And then there's strategies for doing that. Well, in our industry, There's lots of examples. We have lots of handoffs. One of the things that was very different when I came to remodeling from accounting was one of my accountants could go in a room and take someone's financial information, create a set of financials, do their taxes, and they could do that all by themselves. Right?
Hmm.
Nothing in construction happens all by yourself.
Yeah.
Right? We're continually handing off things
Yeah.
to design, things to the ordering materials. Every one of those handoffs is an opportunity for a communications issue or delay or a mistake. And so when you start to analyze why it takes 8 weeks to design a project and 14 weeks to build it or whatever it is, you find that it's not the actual work that's creating that length of time and really driving a lot of the cost. It's all the back and forth.
Yeah.
Right. So one very common thing is like sometimes people will start a project and they'll say, well, let me get your choices. Let me get your selections on the most important things, the things I need to order up front, cabinets and tile and things like that. And I'll come back and talk to you later and we'll get the next round of things. And then there'll probably be a few straggler things that you're going to drag your feet on. Really, what we're saying is we're going to have 3 conversations at least back and forth that really could be captured in one conversation if we did it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And it won't be the conversation time that drives the length of time. It's going to be the time to schedule. It's going
Yeah.
to be the decision making time. So, in all of that, we have a huge opportunity as an industry to say, okay, well, how do we shrink those things down? How do we create that checklist that gets us all the information up front or makes it hard to order the wrong material or whatever it is? And that tends to reduce the time, but it also tends to reduce the cost of jobs. And the funny thing about it is, it's really a win-win-win because from the remodeling company standpoint, they do jobs much more readily on time and on budget.
Mm-hmm.
Or the customer, they actually have much less frustration in getting the job done. And for the employees, they actually end up with a lot less friction, a lot less grief in the process as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it becomes, and the nice thing about it is you don't have to do it for every process. We could take something as simple as our change order process, or even smaller than that, our intake call. Like we could take
Mm-hmm.
one slice of the business and to go through this process, get a little bit of improvement, get a little bit of momentum, and go on
Yeah.
to the next thing. So it's really well designed for businesses like in the construction industry where I don't want to solve everything today. I want to deal with a couple of things that are really slowing us down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the essence behind it. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot more to it, but
No, that's great. I think the class I took, they called it Lean/Six Sigma. I always thought they were the same, but the thing that I took away from it, the one thing that really stuck was when the guy teaching it was just talking about bottlenecks and how
yes,
things will get stuck at one point. Maybe in construction, it's something that got ordered late, and you're waiting for the windows, and so nothing can happen until the windows show
yeah,
up and get put in. And there's so many trickle down things from that. One of the things that stuck again was how employees at a job will have to stay and even work, let's say, when it's kind of not effective
yeah,
because they don't have what they need to really. But the culture and the, I don't know, expectation, just like, well, we're here till 5, and the whatever, you tell me if this is correct lean or not, but what stuck to me was like, don't do that. Let them go. Let them work a shorter day. They'll be
right.
happier. They'll be more effective. Am I remembering that aspect of it correctly?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. One of the things that almost every company we start with is just an easy one is runs to the lumber yard during the day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
We're running out to get something that either wasn't ordered, wasn't anticipated.
Yep.
Sometimes it's to rent a tool or something that, and sometimes it's we just didn't prepare properly, or we didn't have we didn't take the time. What
Yeah.
would take a half hour to properly pack what we need now
Yeah.
is offset by the fact that it's 2 hours by the time we leave the job, go get the item, come back to the job. The customer is sitting there saying, "Why is the crew off the job?" Right?
Yeah.
So there's and it's funny because it seems like we don't have time to take that extra time to make sure we have the material, whatever, and then we spend 4 times that time dealing with the
Yeah.
consequence of it, right?
Yeah.
And even little things like one of the things that we see a lot is folks have service vans, right, or
Yeah.
service vehicles, and you open them up and look at them. A lot of times they're a disaster, right?
Yeah.
And so we'll have people clean them out and label them. And we had a company do that had taken one of our first lean classes, And he said, Doug, I had 3 vehicles, and by the time I cleaned them out and set them all up, we found enough nails to build 2 houses. We had all kinds of junk in there. But we also had found a piece of equipment that was actually on somebody's van that they went and rented a couple weeks before, not
No.
realizing they even had it there because it was
Oh
such
my
a
gosh.
and it
Oops.
sounds ridiculous, but
Yeah.
almost everybody can can remember. Oh yeah, well I
Yeah.
yeah,
Done it.
and so what it says
Hmm.
is little things that we can do can make us much more productive. And the funny thing is, for the employee, it's not about working harder at all. In fact, we actually want them to be able to get more productivity and less stress, which is really important right now, as busy as most folks are.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
pretty
that's
powerful.
great. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. Hey, what do you hear about employees? We don't have a lot of employees, but I know that hiring generally is really tough right now. Are you hearing about that kind of across the industry? And what are you telling
Yeah.
folks to do? I guess just pay more, or what happens?
Yeah, every day. Yeah, it's a real challenge, and it's weird. We kind of went from 18 months ago, we went from, are we going to have any jobs and can we keep our people busy, to, we have way too many jobs and we can't find people to do them. We
Yeah.
had this crossover. Um, it's definitely a challenge. Certainly wages are up. So people have to pay a competitive wage. There's no doubt about that. Benefits are a factor in those kinds of things. But when we're helping somebody recruit, maybe hiring a project manager or something like that, we get pretty involved in that. Um, the one thing that we're seeing is causing people to leave a company and go to another, um, is some combination of work life balance and
Hmm.
company culture. So right now, if you're a project manager, you can command a pretty good wage,
Hmm.
but you're going to get that from probably any number of companies that are willing to pay that. The companies out there right now that are saying we're totally, overrun with work, and I need you to work really hard, and I know you're going to miss your kid's soccer game on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And oh yeah, by the way, we've sold halfway into 2022,
Yeah.
so the good news is we'll have plenty of work. The bad news is your life's going to continue to suck for the next
Yeah.
6 months at
Yeah.
least,
Yeah. You're
right?
booked.
People are exhausted. And,
Yeah.
and and then when you add to it the company culture, if there's not a really good culture in terms of how people feel appreciated, communicated with, that kind of thing, those are the easiest people to dislodge
Yeah.
and attract to a company that really values those things. So
Wow.
we're seeing that as being very important. And so, I'm a believer that you don't recruit when you have an opening, any more than you would wait till you had your last project to go market to get your next project, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're continually marketing. You should really be continuously recruiting. Now,
Hmm.
that doesn't mean you always have an open position, but the
Mm-hmm.
idea that that right candidate's going to come along just because you happen to have an opening and you're
Yeah.
going to find each other on the same day is you're making the odds very low, right? So I
Yeah.
always like to have a short list of folks that, hey, I don't have a position right now, but you seem like someone that would be a good fit for our company. Let's keep talking. Let's have those kinds of discussions, because on either side, sometimes that situation will change much more quickly than either party might have thought.
Hmm.
But then when you have that person and they see a company that has that culture, and it's exhibited by things the company's doing as a team, and that's shown maybe on their website, or, just the company's values expressed not only in the hiring process, but in, the things that they're doing, it makes a big difference.
Hmm.
And I think that's, so right now it's definitely harder to hire, but the people that say, I just can't get anybody, I think they're probably missing an opportunity to really position themselves,
Yeah.
because you have to truly have those things. You have to have an appreciation for a work life balance, and you
Yeah.
have to have a good culture,
Yeah.
so, that's the first thing.
And these things attract each other, companies for this reason, I guess, with great cultures attract great people, and the vice versa is true also. So it seems
Right.
like it's a it's probably dangerous when a company has a, let's say, I don't know what a bad culture could be described as, because they all are all different, but
Yeah.
it's probably a hole you got to dig yourself out of kind of slowly and over time. And likewise, building a good culture probably takes, it's not something that happens overnight, but it's sort of a, almost like building trust. You got to just kind of something to work
Yeah.
on over time. Is that right?
Yeah, and so one of the things we try to encourage companies is to be able to, this kind of an exercise we take them through. called employer of choice. If you had to answer the question, why should somebody work for you, even if you don't have the highest pay and the best benefits, a lot of folks stumble on the answer to that question. But
Mm,
when they really think it through and they can really document it, and we've had some folks do an excellent job of not only doing that, but getting actually kind of like testimonials, but from their employees, just like you would from a
mm.
customer.
Oh,
The
wow.
reason I like working here is, or what I've been here 5 years and these are the things that have meant the most to me. Those send a
Yeah.
strong message. The best hires, honestly, come from somebody that knows somebody that's in the company already.
Huh. That is such a good idea. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that would be so persuasive if you were thinking of taking a job to see a list of testimonials of things like
Yeah,
that. And if you have good employees, it would be they'd probably be happy to do it if you're obviously wanting them to be honest. So
yeah,
probably
and
very
so
easy.
yeah, and social media is a great tool for that as well. So we see more and more business owners that not just saying, "Hey, I've got a job available,"
Yeah.
but in a 2-minute video, right? I mean, even in this format, you come across more. You get a read on people, right?
Yeah.
It's much more three-dimensional than an
Yeah.
ad is. But then if you take that a step further, and there's an employee that's on, Facebook or whatever, Instagram, and they're saying, come join our team, and this is why it's special to me. It's like,
Mm.
well, okay, if that's what I'm looking for, and I'm certainly, and I'm capable of doing the job, and I've got
Yeah.
choices, that makes you that employer of choice. Because in a service business, and this was true in my business as well. I look back at 20 some odd years of decisions, and I couldn't tell you how much money I made in 2014, or, lots of
Mhm.
things that seemed really important at the time, but I could tell you the hires I made that I was proudest of, the
Mm.
ones I made that I shouldn't have, the ones I didn't that I wish I had, right?
Yeah.
It's all about the right team, the right people. And yet it becomes a little bit of an afterthought, like, well, we've got an opening. Let's go find a such and such,
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of social media, to what extent are you advising people to get involved with social media for their business, maybe for marketing? You've been probably around in general long enough to see people do it great without it, and I'm sure you got clients who are doing a great job with it right now. It takes time and effort. So, are you kind of pushing people to build out their social media, or sort of
Yeah.
what's your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, no, I think it needs to be a piece of the marketing strategy. I mean, certainly as more and more of the purchasing public is coming from a younger generation, it's more of how they're looking at things, where they're looking for, uh, you know, companies and trying to get a read on them. So I think it's important. I think with marketing, everything starts with who are we trying to market to and what are we trying to tell them. And
Yeah.
one of the challenges I have with a lot of marketing companies is they want to tell you all the tactics. We'll do your website and SEO and social media, blah, blah, blah. And I always stop and say, okay, who are we talking to and what are we telling them? And that's
Yeah.
usually when they ask me to leave the meeting. Um, but
Yeah.
the reality is, once we know that, then something like the right social media, like Instagram, for example, is fantastic for making quick, easy connections with the customer, letting them get a sense of, you know, what your company culture is like. Is
Yeah.
it a little lighthearted? Is it more family driven? And is it? But it's also an excellent place to showcase some really really great work.
Yeah.
So I think it's got to be a growing piece of what people are looking at
Yeah.
and looking at doing. But I think the people that sort of run down the path of just doing it before they stop and think about who they're talking to and and what that message is.
Yeah.
They create a lot of activity, but probably leave a lot on the table.
Well, I didn't. It didn't occur to me till this conversation, but you're right. A social media strategy could be aimed at hiring and recruiting, and have it be well worth the time and effort. So it really, and especially in this job market where that's tough, and so that's a really interesting thought. You could. There's probably a lot of ways to utilize social media. That would be one, and you could probably do it and take care of several of these things
Yeah,
in one shot. Well, Doug, this is really great. So give us your contact info. Remodelersadvantage.com is the website, I believe, but where else can people find some of your resources
sure.
and
So people
product?
can reach out to me directly at Doug@remodelersadvantage.com. And actually, the easiest way to, if someone ever wanted to have a conversation, you can actually go to www.15minuteswithdoug.com. and that'll put you right into my calendar for a 15-minute, just kind of talk
Yeah.
about the business sort of a thing. So those are probably the two easiest. And then, when people do reach out, we do a lot of webinars. We put a lot of content out there. Really, kind of a low impact way to say, let me just kind of get
Yeah.
in the loop on what's going on.
Yeah.
And so that's probably the best.
Hey, here's my last question for you. And you've been in consulting long enough. You're the perfect person to ask. What do you say when people kind of show up and are initially so skeptical of hiring a consultant from in terms of, I know my business, you've never installed an air conditioner your entire life, da da da. And that's okay, fair enough. And yet your client testimonials would say otherwise. So what do you say to someone who kind of has that way of thinking about their own business, that and there's something to it, that truly they know it better than anyone, so how could anybody else give them advice? So where do you go when you get someone who's got that question?
Sure, that's a great question, and it's one I experienced a lot when I first started because I did not have a remodeling background. I didn't have a construction background.
Yeah.
Um, and so, really, what it comes down to is, you know, there are some proven business processes, there are some strategies, there are a lot of best practices, industry data. And really, one of the nice things about roundtables is every time we have a roundtables meeting, I get retrained on what's going on in the industry, right? And
Yeah.
so, what it means is, a lot of times consulting is I learned how to do something 20 years ago, and then I spent 20 years showing other people how to do it, right?
Yeah.
I will tell you that literally today, I learned 15 new things about the industry from the group that I was working with.
Wow.
And that happens continuously.
Yeah.
So it's really applying good business practices to this ever evolving situation,
Yeah.
which really, I always tell people, I want you to understand three things: what's going on, what your choices are, and what your resources are, right? That's all I want to do with consulting. And so if we get a really good read, either through financial information or surveys or whatever, these are the truths. These are the facts, right? Because a lot of times we don't see that in our own business.
Yeah.
We're busy, but so what's going on. Now, based on my experience, these are a range of choices that you have. Your industry experience is what's going to tell you which one's going to be best for you.
Yeah.
And here are some resources. Maybe it's a book, maybe it's a webinar, maybe it's a discussion with somebody that's just gone through this. But if you know what your challenges are, your choices are, and your resources are, then you apply those years of knowledge that you have in the industry. Now we got ourselves a ball game.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you're right. Like, just even if someone's been let's say a remodeling contractor for 30 years, that's great. But there's also something to being in 30 different remodeling contractors' warehouses over the last 5 years. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, and so
Right.
like your roundtable idea just sounds so cool. I really think that's got to be the most valuable and probably fun for those business owners
Yes,
experience to kind of it's just almost like look at their business through a different lens, and that's got to just be really helpful. Maybe
it
not,
is. And
maybe
I'll
not
give you one
nonstop, but
parting thing.
yeah,
When we do the case study analysis, right, on the company that we're there to visit, we go visit them. The team comes back. They put together this analysis. It's almost always delivered in the form of a skit
mm,
or a game, or
mm,
they get super creative. They have a really good time. I mean, these are fun folks. I mean, it really is
yeah,
a fun group. But what it does is it really resonates.
yeah,
So, in our last group, we had someone that designed a board game around this particular company's challenges. And this guy had to get up and sort of play the board game, and he was drawing cards of, but it was like, but it totally resonated with him and his
yeah,
team. And those are the kinds of things that you want, because it is there's so much that's just about doing a really good job and that kind of thing, but a lot of it is just seeing the piece of it you don't see.
yeah,
um, but it also doesn't have to. Good business can be a really fun experience too. And I think people learn a lot more when they're enjoying themselves.
yeah. That's amazing. Well, Doug, thank you so much for coming on. We'll link to your websites and that link so people can get on your calendar if they are a remodeling contractor and something in here is speaking to them. We'll make that possible. And best of luck to you going forward. And thanks again for taking the time to speak to us.
Sure, my pleasure.